Hi, and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Necessary Evil, which is episode 8 of season 2 of Star Trek Deep Space Nine. This video is a part of Star Trek Week, where I'll be reviewing episodes of Star Trek all week as requested by my viewers. This episode was requested by Eddie Renner. So Necessary Evil is the episode that begins with Quark being hired by a Bajoran woman to retrieve a box locked away in what used to be the chemist shop on the station. With Rom's help, Quark manages to retrieve the box but can't help himself and looks inside it to see a list of names. However, the woman that hired him sends an assassin to kill Quark in the case he looks at what's inside. However, Quark survives the attack but is in critical condition in the infirmary. This, however, draws the attention of Odo, who launches an investigation, and after trying some obvious scare tactics with Rom, he learns what happened, and the fact that the list of names comes from the chemist shop is of particular interest to him, and so we are treated to a series of flashbacks depicting the events of when Odo first became an investigator on the station 8 years ago during the Cardassian occupation, as he was recruited by Dukat to investigate the murder of the chemist shop owner. Odo's investigation leads him to the chemist shop owner's wife, whom we recognize as the woman who hired Quark in present times. She accuses her husband of having an affair with a woman who likely killed him, and when Odo goes to interrogate that woman, we see Kira Nerys, and this is apparently the first time these two met. However, after an intense investigation, Odo learns Kira wasn't having an affair with the chemist shop owner, and she admits to sabotaging the ore processing center, which as far as the Cardassians would be concerned would be a death sentence, but because she was not guilty of the crime Odo was investigating, he doesn't turn her in and she goes on her merry way. In present times, Odo discovers that the woman who hired Quark has received large sums of money from apparent strangers shortly after Quark's attack. He then deduces that the people who sent her the money were the other names on the list, hence she was blackmailing them. Another attempt is made on Quark's life by the same assassin who is thwarted by Rom, much to his disappointment. However, Odo puts the pieces together that the names on the list were of Bajoran collaborators and that the woman was blackmailing them so they wouldn't be arrested. This also leads Odo to deduce that Kira did in fact kill the chemist shop owner for being a collaborator. However, she clarifies that it was a colleague of hers that sabotaged the ore processing and that her mission was to recover the list of collaborators, but the chemist shop owner discovered her and a struggle ensued that ended in his death. Odo feels betrayed, but Akira explains he was working for the Cardassians at the time and couldn't be trusted. But the two of them ultimately agree that it doesn't need to affect their current friendship. So this was a generally well-received episode. Many of the showrunners, such as Ira Stephen Burr, count this among their favorite episodes, and Nana Visitor and Renee Auberjonois also cite this as one of the favorite episodes that they've ever done. I myself am not quite as enthused over this episode, however I do admit it was a solid entry and certainly one of the best episodes of Deep Space Nine's second season, as the first two seasons of Deep Space Nine were a bit lacking compared to the rest of the series, as it was still finding its footing, and this was definitely an earlier episode that helped shape it into the great series that it would later become. This episode had a strong detective noir feel to it. Many of the references were very intentional. Most notably was Odo's narration via his security logs, which very much read like a typical detective voiceover in a hard-boiled noir classic. And to be perfectly honest, that aspect of this episode held it back a bit for me, as I found that's become a bit of a trope, and I always find it particularly cheesy, just the language used with the colorful metaphors that aren't really how people talk, and I didn't find this quite fitting with Odo's character. In other aspects, too closely resembled a 1940s noir, such as the chemist shop owner's wife coming off as a typical classy 1940s dame, and other aspects like they were just a bit too much for me. However, the strong point of this episode was definitely getting a glimpse at what the station was like during the Cardassian occupation, which is the first such episode in the series to do so. Later episodes like Things Past and Wrong, Starker, and Death or Night would also take a look back on what the station looked like during the occupation. However, in this episode we get to see the first time that Odo met Dukat, Quark, and Kira, which certainly was fascinating, although I do find Odo's first meeting with Kira a tad inconsistent, as it was never hinted that they had a history like this before. However, it doesn't directly contradict anything, I just find it a tad bit hard to swallow. Odo's first meeting with Quark, however, fits right into place and makes perfect sense, as Quark tries to entice and bribe Odo with food or companionship, but seeing how he doesn't care about either, it makes him his perfect adversary, and the way that Odo instantly sees through Quark's lies was also telling of their relationship to come, so it was really great to see that. I was also impressed with the way these flashbacks so perfectly tied into the present day storyline and didn't seem out of place or unnecessary at all. In fact, the flashbacks perfectly work in conjunction with the present day scenes to tell an overall interesting narrative. And it is interesting that Odo never solved his first case until this very moment, and it turns out the murderer in his very first case was in fact Major Kira. So the episode ends with a tense moment between these two friends, and while they agree not to let this affect their friendship, you can tell there was a new tension between them. However, this is never played off in the future. In fact, this is kind of contradicted in the episode Things Past, which aired in the 5th season, where we learn Odo had sentenced innocent Bajorans to death during his time as chief of security on the station during the occupation, and has been holding in this guilt for all that time. That makes him come off as quite the hypocrite here, that he takes the more high ground against Kira for lying to him when all the time he has been holding something back from her. Of course, the real answer is when this episode was written they hadn't thought of that storyline yet, so I suppose it's more of a criticism of Things Past. However, overall I do find Things Past as a much better and more interesting look back at the occupation than this episode was, as it tackles more controversial issues and it also explores the precarious situation Odo was in with working with the Cardassians, as I always found it a bit odd that Odo used to work for the Cardassians and was now seen as an ally to the Bajorans. That this was kind of glossed over in the first season, and this episode attempts to tackle it a bit. However, I think Things Past does a much better job of fully exploring the complexities involved. Whereas in this episode, Odo does appear to act all high and mighty, whereas Kira pointed out, he does in fact work for the Cardassians. It was also great seeing Dukat as head of the station, and the kind of sleazy and egotistical leader that he was, which would be explored more in later seasons. In fact, apparently there was a deleted scene that Rick Berman had removed where Odo goes to question the chemist shop owner's wife and finds Dukat kissing her as he leaves her room. The implication being that they're having an affair. The effect was meant to throw people off to suggest Dukat might be a suspect in the murder. It also shows that Dukat had had affairs with the Bajoran women under his rule, something that would be explored more in depth in later seasons, so it's interesting to learn that it was first introduced all the way back in the 2nd season, but was deleted from the episode. Executive producer Michael Piller expressed that one of his biggest regrets is that this scene was deleted, and he believes he should have fought back harder to keep this scene in, as he believes it would have greatly enhanced the episode. Mark Alimo, who plays Dukat, also expressed great dismay that this scene was deleted. So the depiction of Rom in this episode was really interesting as well, as it's very obvious to me whenever watching the depiction of Rom in earlier seasons and comparing that to his depiction in later seasons that they drastically changed his character, and I would describe it less as a natural character evolution and more like a contrived and inconsistent storytelling, where it was all too obvious the writers simply changed their minds on what kind of character they wanted Rom to be. Although this was the first episode in which Rom was shown to have any kind of technical skill skill, which would become a main part of his character later on. However, in this episode, Quark was shown to be completely ignorant and surprised by Rom's prowess, whereas in later seasons it was explained that Quark was well aware of Rom's skills and exploited them. Plus, Rom comes off a tad bit more idiotic in this episode and a lot more devious, as he wanted Quark to die so he could have the bar, whereas in later seasons he comes off more as a lovable goof, whereas I would describe him here more as a despicable moron, and I would argue it's totally inconsistent. However, he did work well in this episode as comic relief, as Odo and Sisko so easily did the whole good cop bad cop routine on him, and there were a lot of great comedic moments between Odo and Rom. It was also interesting seeing Odo as a skilled reader of human behavior, as in flashback scenes he very easily could tell things about people, as he could tell that the chemist's wife didn't cry over his death, and that Kira didn't work in the mines just by looking at her hands. It is strange, though, that this is the only time we see such skills, and he never really displays these abilities in present times, which is odd. I suppose he forgot them. And of course I have to mention the Cardassian neck trick, which was mentioned several times in this episode as an amusing trick that Odo would do to entertain the Cardassian troops, although it never really revealed what the Cardassian neck trick is, and frankly I'm glad, as if it was ever explained what it was, it wouldn't be, that big of a deal. However, it worked much better not knowing what it was, and it's interesting that at this time he was seen more of some sort of entertainer, an image that Odo loathed and tried to get away from as much as possible. If I'm not mistaken, the Cardassian neck trick was mentioned later in later episodes at least once, but it did work really well in this episode. So my rating for Necessary Evil out of 10 is an 8, extremely good. Although I don't hold this episode in as high of esteem as many others do, I still do really appreciate that it is a very solid episode, executed quite well and pulling off an interesting mystery which has implications on our characters' current relationships as well as exploring their past. However, I suppose I'm just not a fan of the detective noir genre, and more to the point, am not impressed with modern day stories trying too hard to emulate those classics, as they come off as unoriginal and a tad cheesy to me. But overall, this was a solid episode that told an interesting story. So that's it for my review of Necessary Evil. If there's an episode from any of the 5 Star Trek series you'd like me to review, just leave a comment below with the episode you'd like me to review and I'll endeavor to do so, but please, 1 episode request per person, and also be advised it will be at least a month before I can get to any new requests. But be sure to check out my channel for many more Star Trek videos, as well as videos on many other shows such as Game of Thrones and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all that, and thanks a lot for watching.